Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to the final panel of today's Digital Dialogues. My name is Jenny Fulton. I'm the moderator of the program and Art Basel's head of editorial. And I am delighted to be hosting this panel entitled Collecting in an Expanding Art World. What does that mean? Well, we will soon find out. I'd like to welcome onto the stage, please, our panelists, starting with moderator Eli Scheinman. Please give him a big hand of applause. Elle Anastasiou, co-founder and director of the Hex Collection. Ryan Zurrer, did you sit here? Ryan Zurrer, co-founder and founder of the Dialectic group of One of One collection in Zug. And last but not least, B, Beauty and Punk, entrepreneur and art advisor from Lisbon. Eli, please do take it away.
Thank you, Jenny. Okay, welcome everyone. Our last panel of the day. Very appreciative that you're all here. I think this is a very interesting and timely conversation. We're going to unpack the art world through the expanding collector experience today. Three incredible panelists to help us do that. And when I say the expanding art world, what I really mean is expanding across a number of dimensions. That's the market, the sort of conceptual nature, and then of course the technological nature of the art market and the art world more broadly. So there's a lot to unpack. I want to introduce each of the panelists for a moment. So to my left, we have Elle Anastasiou from the Hex Collection, co-founder and director, based in Basel. The Hex Collection is an institution dedicated to digital and experiential art from the 1960s to today. Elle has a background as a CEO and an advisor to East Asia and Europe, brings deep expertise across curatorial strategy, institutional partnerships, and the art market. For those who do not know, Hex Collection is producing the largest James Turrell exhibition in Europe in 2 decades this October. Extremely exciting. Elle, cannot wait to see that. Hex also partners with institutions like UNESCO and the Kennedy Center. So Elle, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for
very
having
excited.
me.
To Elle's left, many of you will know Ryan Zurrer. Ryan is also Basel-based, is the founder of One of One and the managing director of Dialectic, founder of Dialectic as well. He leads one of the world's most forward-facing digital art collections. For those who are digital art collectors, you will know Ryan's collection very well with some of the seminal works. Those include Beeble's Human One and Rafik Anadol's Unsupervised, both shown by Ryan and by One of One in major cultural institutions and museums around the world. Ryan has earned a place on Art News's top 200 collectors list, being the only collector in the digital sphere focused on digital art on that list. So Ryan, great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And to Ryan's left, we have B, who is a collector, curator, and founder of Nebula in NPO that works at the intersection of art, culture, and systems strategy. For those who know B, she is also a connector of people, and so we're very fortunate to have B here in this conversation. She has a background in molecular biology and advises across Web3, museums, and public programming. Her practice centers on building lasting cultural infrastructure and helping artists and institutions navigate the complexities of digital collecting with rigor and care. I'm going to put this away and we're going to have a beautiful conversation. So let's begin with a topic that is top of mind for me and is behind all of us. This whole session, this whole program is called Digital Dialogues. When we talk about digital art in this context, that's quite an amorphous term. It is unclear precisely what we're describing. I think many of you, and we'll get into it, many of you as well, have different understandings of what that means to you in your collecting journey and in the art world more broadly. So B, for example, you talk about digital art in some cases as in silico art, and I want to unpack that. Ryan, you talk about sort of art of the digital age, really contextualizing it in history in that way. And then Elle, I think you talk about sort of experiential and digital art. So maybe B, starting with you, unpack this notion for us, which will be new to many, of in silico art.
Well, it really comes from my background. I have a PhD in molecular biology, so we do a lot of work in vivo, in vitro, and in silico. So anything that would be run through a computer that would involve the machine would be in silico. And the idea that we talk about AI work, but in cases like Sugwen does, LLMs.
Sure.
trained in her work, they are very physical. They're not digital. So how can we say digital artworks if they're painted by a robot? And how can we talk about digital art and exclude the people from the 60s? So how can we take one thing that would encompass it all, that would just involve the machine, and then the subcategories would come below. Like, when was it made? Was it tokenized or not? Like, and then there would be a flow of it. But the in silico comes from this idea of trying to put all this art into one umbrella, because in the end, it's all art.
Yeah.
But how do we mix Beeple's Human One with Franke, which is all digital, right? So it's all an in silico type of work.
Sure.
We don't talk about canvas. We talk about the in silico as Silicon Valley. When I say Silicon Valley, it kind of clicks. So that is what is it built on?
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
Ryan, thoughts?
It's interesting when we think about this taxonomy of digital art that spans a number of subcategories, whether it's like algorithmic or generative art, which is different from, say, figurative, digital art and so on and so forth. But I do like this kind of all-encompassing umbrella of in silico art. We like to think of it as art of the digital age. There is a point where our collecting focus really has been iconic works of the 21st century. So, from 2000 on. However, there are moments where we pause and think that it's really clear that that's not the inflection point. That the moment of the century in the Catholic calendar is not actually the inflection point. There's something that happened sort of late 70s, early 80s, pre-internet, that you can see this almost shift in this like post-contemporary art of a digital canvas.
Yeah, understood.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Let's hear it.
Let's hear it.
I think that coming from an academic art historical or art historic background, there is always a question of nomenclature, and that question is often debated between curators, art professionals, and so on. It's not usually something that extends out into even forums like this, definitely not into the market. There's been debates for decades, where is post-contemporary, what is contemporary? I mean, there is so much literature on this, which is extensive. Definitional debates are not new in the art world.
Elle, let me ask you to define it in different terms. How does the collection define the scope of what you do and do not collect?
I mean, I think that there is very little divide from the 60s onwards between the genesis of what could be considered the proto-digital art. We use the term experiential art because a significant number of our works are site-specific and installation-based. I wouldn't say that's necessary, it's not an individual term which one has coined, which is specific to you, but it does reflect exactly what we have within our collection. I think digital is a really good over-encompassing term, but I do think it is also quite confusing because it does have all of these subgenres and it has all of these different connotations.
Sure.
Some positive, some negative, particularly in the traditional market I come from. And so I think we can't come to a conclusion. I don't think that we as a collection are in the right place to make that decision. Perhaps you guys agree. But I think that it's for perhaps the larger art world to continue that debate. It's what makes it interesting about this field.
Sure. Well, hopefully we're contributing to that debate a little bit here today.
Hopefully.
Elle, let me ask you one more question. Does the output of the work that you ultimately collect in the collection need to have a digital form, or it can take the form of a sculpture, a painting? Is that part of the criteria?
So basically our premise is that anything which is digital in its display or digital in its production. And so there's this expanded field of the acquisitions you can consider if you look at things like computer-generated painting, which of course there's been some really significant shows over the past year in the US and also here in Europe regarding that really newly highlighted segment of collecting, which is digital in its own way. So I would say it's more expanded than simply just screen-based, time-based, video, and so on, which are its own niches too.
Yeah, understood. Okay, this may be the only time today we talk explicitly about what has become, and for good reason in many ways, a dirty term, which is NFTs. And I want to bring it up very briefly because in my own conversations, and again, this might be the only time all week I've said that word as well, but through the lens of digital collecting, I want to understand, maybe, Ryan, starting with you, how do you think about what an NFT represents as part of your collecting? Is it a COA at this point? Is it a protocol? How do you think about that part of it?
I mean, we have always looked at NFTs, from as a function of a technology, whether it's 721s or ERC 1155s, as a certificate of provenance of digital art.
Yes.
And the advent of NFTs were extremely important. Before NFTs, there wasn't collectability of digital art, and so digital artists had a really tough time, commercializing their work. Yeah. I think most famously, before Beeple found NFTs, the most he ever got for an everyday was $110.
And an everyday are these paintings he creates one every single day.
These digital artworks that he paints every day. So what this shows us is that crucible moment of digital scarcity, which, by the way, if you go back to the advent of Bitcoin, that was just solving a computer science problem that conveyed digital scarcity. And with digital scarcity, you get collectability because you get through that scarcity, and then with collectability, you have value ascribed. And so it was a really important moment in time. It represented a fundamental life change for many digital artists. And I am very proud to collect digital works that are represented as NFTs on chain, and remain so today. I think it will have a time in the sun again,
sure.
Not too distant future.
Any thoughts?
I agree, and I think for me the click was, I already bought art before, and then I was in crypto, and then I found my case was CryptoPunks, and it kind of just combined everything. It made sense because it was art, because it used technology that I believed in, and it gave provenance. So the right-click save it lost that narrative because you had something that would show that you actually own the work, which is incredibly important. It matters to you. It matters to have in your collection. You have hopefully an emotional attachment to the pieces, not just a financial one, but it matters a lot. So for me, it was back in 2017, and it just made sense after that too. Like, we buy artworks here, and we mostly have provenance in everything that we buy, but depending on how old the artwork is, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
But if that is built in from day one, and we do have the technology to do that, why not? That is my question. Like, why wouldn't you want to add that level of security and information and documentation?
Sure.
I think the problem with it being attached to the financial, to the speculation, that has always been in human nature is problematic. And I think I am not going to be the one that will change nomenclature, but I think it's important that we have that discourse.
Yes.
That will make a difference in how we talk about this art. So the sour taste in the mouth that you have, the last time I'll say this word, I hope that we reach a point where it is detached from that. It is focused on the art and the art piece and the documentation. So for me, it is inevitable that it will be part of artworks in the future. And I just hope that it's better accepted as a documentation, as provenance, than as it's not a gimmick.
Yes.
It's not just a factor for speculation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's about sort of distilling it down to the dimensions you described and doing as much as is possible to move off of some of the other connotations over time. Let's shift gears a little bit and actually zoom out. In an expanding art world, and as collectors yourselves, there is this dynamic of a sort of disintermediation where collectors like yourselves can now reach out to and have relationships directly with artists. For myself and my own experience as a collector, that is a beautiful value proposition of what exists in this moment. I can foster relationships directly with the artist that I ultimately end up collecting, and that's meaningful. That adds a lot of meaning. It imbues the process in important ways for myself. But the sort of related question is, what does that mean for institutions, for curators? Maybe Elle, starting with you, what is your sort of discovery process? you're a curator yourself of the collection. How do you think about sort of this disintermediation, the role of curators?
I think that having a direct relation to an artist is both a privilege but also sometimes a liability. Galleries have really since Converge, right, been a buffer between collectors and living artists, or their estates, their representatives. The reasons for that is sometimes because negotiating with people who come from an artistic background and talking about financial transactions, which ultimately is why we're all here, right, for the art market, it's very difficult. And so while I am a big proponent of having increased disintermediation such that we can enrich the collecting process and also enrich the relationships and institutional relationships that are developed out of those interactions, I think we do have to remember that the gallery has been created for a reason and that we are seeing an increased number of agents, such as, estate managers, wealth advisors, banks, art advisors, you name it. There's a whole gamut of these increasingly important positions who work alongside individual collectors to develop their process. With Hex, Karel Komarek, the founder, and myself as co-founder have an extremely good rapport. He comes from an investment background, both in tech and otherwise, and I, of course, come from a more cultural advisory background, working on a strategic level, more on the governmental, CEO, sovereign side. So put us together, and we have a very, very different approach to selection. However, what has been very important for us is identifying both living and deceased artists, namely working with their estates, and finding the most excellent representation of their oeuvre, of their corpus, and being able to develop the context for their public display. And that context can be alongside, the Kennedy Center in Washington as the first private cultural institution to work with them last year. Or it can be, with UNESCO in Prague. The same artwork can be displayed in different contexts. I think that for us, I mentioned experiential as a definition, and it is really critical because for us, we're always driven by public display. And that can be a reflexive relationship. What can the artwork and its public display give us as a collection, give us as, a team behind a collection? There are always ramifications. But that's really the driver. And so that's how we make our decisions.
Yeah.
Investment in people, our team, and the artists we work with.
Yeah, understood. Well said. Ryan, how do you think about
this?
this?
I would take the other side of that.
Sure.
in recognizing that I think this week may be remembered as one of the cornerstones in the disruption of the gallery model. Very clearly, the gallery model is shifting and changing and going to need to evolve. For this generation of artists, we find it much more rewarding to Bee's point, to connect with artists and build a relationship directly with them, because our art is mostly art that evolves and changes over time. You have to have a connection with the artist. Like, there's a maintenance question there. There's a lot of other things that just need to be executed on. So when you're talking, museum scale work that evolves and the artist is committed to continue to evolve, there's no way around a direct relationship. And then because there's no way around the direct relationship, it does beg the question, well, what's the gallery doing here? And we have had those moments in the recent past that we kind of, both I and the artists are like, are they still needed? Like, let's just do our thing here.
I think we don't have to be exclusive, though.
That's right.
Right. That's
To be clear, we love the galleries.
They don't want to deal with the sale.
Yep.
They want to engage with you, the collector, but they don't want to be involved with how to, how to sell, how to price. They sometimes don't know. It is a lot of what the artist doesn't want to do. There's the message, there's the media, there is the documentation, and then maybe a gallery will remind the artist, actually, you should be thinking about this. Because I was talking to Ian, who I think is in the audience, from the Toledo Museum, and now we have these huge problems with this old media. And it's a process of co-creation, because the way you would display that doesn't exist anymore. What do you do now? You want to be true to the artist, but you have to know the vision.
Yeah.
So what was the vision for you to be true to it? So how do you maintain documentation if you just think about creation?
Yeah.
I think there is a place for galleries, but I think, I agree with you, that they are not mandatory.
Yeah.
There should be a choice.
Case by case basis with
Exactly.
nuance.
There should be a
Like,
choice.
Nuance
I agree with that.
prevails,
Yeah.
right?
I feel like Elle has thoughts
Yeah,
here.
go ahead.
No, I mean, I fully agree with that. I think that we're lucky that we're living in a time where at every level of the market, direct access to the artists that you can afford is pretty accessible. At our level, you know, we talk directly to the artists in their studios very often. We have an exhibition here at Art Basel open until Sunday, Frames of Reference, and Carsten Nicolai's installation. Him and his studio manager flew here and installed the work, and it took a week. And that's, you know, part of a much longer conversation about conservation, maintenance,
Yeah.
insurance values. This is the admin stuff that's not sexy that I have
Yes.
to think about, and we all have to think about too.
Yeah.
But saying that, you know, I think that accessibility is also very overwhelming for artists. I think it's not always a positive thing, and you've mentioned some of
Yes.
that as well, B. Yes, galleries perhaps are not mandatory. It's of course an evolving system. Direct contact to artists, you know, think about the Renaissance, right? Like the de Medicis and Strozzi family, the biggest commissioners of art of all time. It's not new for collectors to have direct relationships. But I think that it is exactly that. It's an ecosystem, and there are many different players, there are many different puzzle pieces, and to be aware of how they fit together is the only way you can be best informed and make the best decisions here.
Ryan, I want to come back to you for a moment. The role of institutions in this conversation, one of one, you have made that a priority
Yep.
to the works from your collection show, exhibit in very meaningful institutions, museums around the world. I mean, it's sort of self-evident why that might be important, but articulate it in your own words. Why has that been such a focus?
Yeah, so we've been fortunate enough to learn the lessons relatively early on in our journey that cultural institutions remain at the core of our society and will continue to do so. However, there needed to be something post-COVID to really bring people back. And certainly the Rafik show at MoMA was the example of that, where what we learned is that beautiful digital art that is forward-looking and awe-inspiring, and awe with digital art is more trivial to create because you can use scale more trivially, right? Scale, you can find awe, and
Sure.
with digital art, that's a lot easier to reproduce than, say, with painting or sculpture. And we saw people get really excited about that, and
Yeah.
the lesson learned there was that digital art will be one of the tools that museums need to use to bring people back post-COVID. And we've been very encouraged by the reaction of other global institutions that understand that, their willingness to lean in. And as a result, we've tried to help where we can, whether it's setting up, crypto wallets using
Sure.
secure Shamir's secret sharing, or whether it's thinking through display, or because it doesn't always have to be screens.
Sure.
Shouldn't.
Shouldn't always
Shouldn't.
Yeah,
screens.
light boxes have been, have been great outlets in certain
Yeah.
instances. And then also just helping them think through other artists. So we see Sasha Stiles.
Yes, can we
go
break that news? Is that something
yeah,
we can share?
I think so. So Sasha Stiles will go up in the Gund Gallery at MoMA this fall.
Great. Sasha was
which
just
we're-
on stage, of course.
We're very excited about that.
Is she here? There
Really-
she is.
Yeah, really the defining AI poet of our time, and the prose and exhibition of that is
Yes.
beautiful, both in its prose and in its aesthetic. The Gund Gallery has really become this iconic now digital space we're excited to see how that continues to evolve.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, let's talk more about making digital art legible. This is a conversation I have a lot and think a decent amount about, is what are the outputs of a work that is fundamentally created with digital tools? Ryan, your example you just gave at the MoMA is like your sort of most self-evident version of a huge format digital screen. But of course, that will not resonate with all collectors, nor should it, but it will resonate with a very specific, I think, audience and museum attendee in particular. I'm curious, B, how do you think about sort of making what is fundamentally a digital work more legible to a broader set of art collectors? Is it recontextualizing and thinking about sculpture and painting that was created with digital tools fundamentally? How do you sort of introduce work in physical spaces that does that job?
I really did two people that you want to talk to, the traditional collectors and the people that have never collected. And
Yes.
those are two different artworks that you're going to show. You know, for traditional collectors, you want something that they recognize, that has this painting feeling, that has the texture, that has something that they have collected before. For new people, I think it is the accessibility, the involvement, the feeling that you are a collector too, and that maybe somehow you were even part of, you co-created, like the bead frames from Matt Deslaris. It was a beautiful project. It was not about the scarcity, but it was about the involvement and about the co-creation process and having fun. And this is something that I like bringing my children here, because I see them get inspired and using the things that they see here to create art at home, both physically and digitally. But then in the end, we always either plot or we will display in one screen. We want to have that bigger than the digital that we collect.
Yeah.
And I think that is the thing. You have to have better ways of displaying art, of making reference to that art piece. So you have to have basically a sculpture to showcase an art piece that is not a screen on a wall, that has a place, but it cannot be the standard.
Yeah, I want to come back to you. How do you actually, in your own space, bring works that are fundamentally digital and a painting and a sculpture together? How do you sort of actually live with your work and your collection?
We have things from the 1600s to last week.
Yes.
So we do mix by what it means to us.
Yeah.
So we have a Charlotte Johansson that started working with textiles, and then in the 80s started getting, got a computer and started producing, digital art. And then we have Ana Lucia, who does generative, but we have a physical that was embroidered. So the combination of, the two ways that they went opposite ways, but have the same background. And then an Emily Shi next to it, which has a beautiful texture, but we actually have it as a print.
Sure.
So we have the things that women have done through ages being immortalized through the digital. We have lost a lot of what women have done because we have worked with ephemeral materials, paper, textiles, ceramics, things that have not been kept. So we're not that big on canvas.
Yeah.
But now, thanks to digital, I think that is a great tool to be able to maintain those works in history currently. And this is a little bit what we try to do. We try to see the history of the women that we collect, like Maria Sibylle Meren, who took in the 1600s her daughter to Suriname to paint, and Inés Richelieu, who is such a strong woman with a delicate skin that portrays strength through that. So I think that is what we mix. Like it can look a little bit random, but is incredibly precise in what we see in each artwork.
Sure, beautiful. Elle, coming to you. Oh, unless you'd like to react to
B, it's really interesting that coming from this multidisciplinary collecting that is very charged by narrative and obviously a big personal passion and love for what you do love, that you're so focused on material culture and material specifications of display, but also of the objects that you collect. Because I think that, yes, materials and objects themselves, the individual artworks that collectors interface with, whether it's at a fair, in an institution, or just a private collection, yes, thinking about their materiality, whether that is digital, quote unquote, whatever that means, or not, yes, that's really important. But on a macro perspective, there's a lot more here to dig into. And I think that we can divide the original question about, let's say, bias in collecting and bias in viewership is the two parts of how we need to think about how people interact with digital art. We're always going to have people in the world, the vast majority, who are viewers. And they might be collectors of something else. They might be collectors of cartoons, of stamps. People have this natural psychiatric drive towards collecting that, again, is very well documented in neurobiology. But look, most people are not art collectors, and most people enjoy art in a less participatory way than most of the market actors who we have here in this room. And we need to find a way to display artwork in public context, such as what Ryan's doing, such as what we're doing, which is legible, meaning that we need to provide people the intellectual basis upon which they can understand that which they're seeing is art. And that is a process of education, it's a process of exhibition design, it's a process of curatorial expertise, and also very much location and display. Things like displaying at MoMA, displaying at the Pompidou, displaying for us, Kennedy Center, so on and so forth. There is an elevation of that which one might just think, oh, that's a sparkly little light show, or I could buy, a Turrell from Taobao, which is something that legitimately I've been told by people, There is this bias of viewership that complements the bias that collectors feel. That is, we don't know whether this thing that we're seeing, a screen, an object with digital components, what have you, we don't know whether this is art or not. And collectors particularly, as well as audiences, like to know that what they're purchasing, what they're collecting, what they're obsessed by, has a shared communal value. There has to be a frame of reference, there has to be a narrative which is legible to other people.
A contextualization.
Exactly.
In the current socio-economical art of our age.
And this is bolstered, and this is why I've divided this answer into two parts, because collectorship is not simply motivated generally by philanthropy and by loving something. It's a privilege to be able to do it that way. Collections can have all of these different motivations, and those are very individual as much as they are cultural, as much as they are geolocated. Collecting is a huge and very interesting field, and also a huge psychological exercise to try and become a collector, try and learn about what other collectors want.
Sure.
Saying that, one of the biggest difficulties that we have had setting up a collection of work from the 60s to now is that there are no precedents for you to have a conservation structure which involves estates and artists.
Yep.
There is we were the first UBS wealth management account in Switzerland to have both crypto and fiat holdings. And it took 2 years for us to set that up. There are all of these biases, whether it's towards tokenized artwork and the currency surrounding that, it's transactionality, whether it's insurance, all of these, again, non-sexy things, they are not set up for digital art because the market hasn't been big enough. There are no precedents. People don't have a guidebook. You know how to hang a painting. Everybody has a wall. Not everybody has a space for sculpture. But by God, people don't have the time and energy to invest into digital art unless they really love it, like we all do. And that's something which I think we have a responsibility, and Art Basel is doing that here with this kind of program to educate and to change.
Well said, Elle. Ryan, I want to come back to you on this point for another moment. In some of the works that you've collected, there is this interactivity, in fact, which does open the door to a broader collecting audience who can, at a lower price point from the work itself, participate in that artwork and have an artifact, have something that they can collect in that participatory way. Talk about maybe why those artworks in particular are very exciting to you and how you see that dynamic playing out.
Well, I mean, it comes down to a community effect. So one example would be Sam Spratt's Monument Game, where which happens to be up here. So this scene, which is a digital painting, a hand painted but on a digital canvas. Different people could buy an edition and then make an observation on that work. And in designing this with Sam, we set the bar sufficiently high that people wouldn't just put some random statement, that people would actually put thought into it. It kind of cost enough that, again, it acted as what I called him quietly a financial filter. And the really amazing effect there was that you had 256 people who felt not only that they were collectors of this work, but that they were co-creators of this work. And Sam has been really like a shining light in bringing the community along for the ride in the creation of his work, of which is, I don't think unique to digital, but certainly uniquely enabled by digital.
Yes.
And that community effect is extremely powerful. And what you'll see from his, what we've seen from his career, from that to
Yes.
going on and selling, well into, seven-figure territory more recently, and just the support of that community is really, I think, a great beacon for other artists to follow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
also. Oh, go ahead, Bea,
personally
please.
will not forget the experience I had in Venice with Sam, because I left my my comment on the piece, and he wanted the feedback. So not only from me, but he wanted the feedback. He wanted to hear, what did you see? What did you connect? What did you like or didn't like?
Yeah.
And it was, we had a session because we both ended up crying, and his work means so much to me because I know him, I know his family, and I connected in so many levels. I'm biased, I'm a collector. I want to be part of the world that he has created.
Yeah.
And the shared values that we have, us, my family and his, and as collectors. So the shared values and the things that we want to see in the space
Sure.
is something that is very precious.
Well, what's fascinating? You two are now connected, Ryan. You own the Monument Game one of one artwork. Bea, you own a part of that fundamentally.
Yeah.
And Ryan, as the owner of the one of one artwork, you also sort of have this network of those who are also invested and had co-created. So I think it's a very fascinating dynamic, really only possible in those ways with the digital format.
Yeah.
So it's really, really quite fascinating.
Well, we felt a responsibility to exhibit it meaningfully, and went through the work of exhibiting it at maybe the most challenging place there is, Venice.
Yes.
Because of that.
It was great. It was great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But because of that pressure of a community, right?
Sure,
there was a very direct sense of a responsibility that people were very explicit about. Like, hey, what do you, okay, you bought it, next day, what are you doing with it? What are we doing?
Sure.
How do we support, there's one of the things I think that is wonderful about this community of collectors of new works is that the story continues to evolve, and so does their expectations, right? Punks is a perfect example, right? Where that community has a very strong opinion about absolutely everything.
And very divergent sometimes.
Yeah. And could you imagine that? If the community of, say, Rothko Untitled's all had a strong opinion about where it was to be exhibited and how, and whether theirs was included or not, and guess what, that counted, and you had to pay attention to that as an institution. It's it's different, but if you and it can be scary at moments when you get this random person on Twitter messaging you,
And this is where
hey,
the gallery
bud, what are you
filter would have
doing?
been welcome, but I
It
guess.
really is a new dimension of the
Yeah.
collecting experience. These networks that
definitely is.
form and the communities and the conversations that happen amongst those networks and communities.
We are humans, it's for
Yeah.
the good and for the bad.
But net positive.
Yes,
right.
agreed.
Net, this community building is positive. It can be messy, as punks have been, as an
Humans are
example.
messy.
But in the long run, I think the balance is
It pushes it
quite
forward.
positive. Yeah.
Let's talk about a couple specific collecting themes. Let's talk AI collecting. How are you thinking about that in your own collections? There's a bunch of dimensions we could unpack here. There is such a huge supply of artworks now being created with relative ease, I'll sort of ease, but en masse. Anyone can create using many of these tools. How do you siphon through that? And then sort of what's your approach to collecting AI-based works? Is it based on model antiquity? Is it based on a single artist who's using models over time in new ways? Anyone who'd like to take that?
I guess I could start because we are, very direct about our interest in AI art. The core thesis with respect to AI art is that AI democratizes the craft of digital art in parts. And if art is concept and craft, and we've had this democratization of the craft, of the tools of digital art, then what we see as a result should be a renaissance in conceptual art. And so it will not be that the AI will replace the artists. It's an artist using AI will replace, say, other artists. And so we kind of forge into the future very unabashedly with respect to that. We think there's really interesting mediums in which artists are carving out specific niches. We talked about the great Sasha Stiles in the back, Holly Herndon, who uses an auditory medium primarily. I was just in Charleston at Beeple's studio. He has an entire engineering team that is just elbows deep in, everything from, massive machine learning algorithms to LLMs to various other things. You're going to see some wild things occur. But I'm incredibly excited because we are entering into this portal that will be like this amazing time shift, and we'll come out of it in the next sort of 5 years, and a really amazing art will emerge from these new tools, and that's the way to think about them.
I see it as two versions of AI art. Artists that create and train their LLMs and artists that don't. So I think, for me at least, that is the big difference in the type of AI artist. Like Ivona Tao, like Sasha, like Sue Gwen, those create, Sofia Crespo, they create.
You can keep going.
They will, they will train, and and this is something beautiful that the both of them talked about today. They are responsible. They have liability for what comes out of their art. And then there's the prompt art, which is not less art, but is different. You are more of a poet that will get a visual output than a skilled master at art. So you're more skilled with words than with the technique. And I think that's a difference. For better or worse, that is a different conversation completely, and we can do another panel. But when I look at AI art, I see this is an AI artist, or this is a textual artist that got a visual output. And sometimes what I think would be interesting, with that image that was created with a language model that they have not trained, what was your input?
Yeah.
I think that would be so interesting. So what did you think? And what did you want to get out? And why were you happy with that? If I would see the prompt, I think I would like it even more.
Yes.
Because I would be in your head when you were creating it. And that is such a powerful thing that I don't think I have seen anyone do so far.
The prompt as the artist essay?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
fascinating.
but you see, wow, what state of mind were you in? What were you looking for? What pigment did you look for?
Sure.
Because you didn't buy the pigment, you didn't train the pigment, but you looked for it. Yeah. Then show me what you looked for, and I'll see how strong your thesis is.
I love that. Elle, any thoughts here?
Yeah.
Plenty. I think that we're talking about AI art in the same way that we mentioned NFT art earlier. I think that we are talking about a very specific time period, a very specific set of tools, which actually, again, like digital art, are much more complicated and interconnected with everything else. AI, Karel actually wrote an op-ed with Rafik Anadol that was published in Le Monde last year about AI as this nebulous term as well. There is no such thing as an AI. Artificial intelligence is based on computing. It's based on human inputs. There are all of these variety of factors which mean that AI is very frequently disabused in the same way that NFT is, right? Yep. So in the context that you're mentioning AI work, certainly I agree with you, B. Like, you have artists who mine their own pigment, who train their own LLM. People like Suyun Shin, for example, Chinese artist, spends years creating her own pigments, paints her paintings. Or you have people who are using AI as a tool. And AI is their paint, it's their pigment, but they haven't done anything to obtain it, they've just painted with it. I agree with that. I think on a larger scale though, we collect artwork which happens to be digital. We collect artwork which can happen to have a quote-unquote AI component, historical or within this movement. But we collect it because we think that it's worthwhile, that it should be seen, and we think that it's good art. So we aren't driven in the same way that Ryan is, but I think that AI isn't preventative. I think it's a new set of tools that we will continue to see evolve.
Elle, let me ask one quick follow-up before we wrap. When you say worthwhile and good, what does that mean?
I mean, it's subjective, right?
Pardon me?
It's subjective, right? I mean,
distill it as best you can from your perspective.
I think from our perspective, we try to collect things which we think are historically important to the artist. We work with artists, but we also work with more historical works which have been turn points or major touch points
Sure.
in an artist's career. Later this year for our Terrell's show, we're showing 6 works which range from the 1960s to the 2000s, which is very rare because the 60s works are so bloody complicated, no one wants to show them. We can't conserve them. We've had to do a year's work to get here.
Wow.
And so when I say important, I mean important whether that's documented by the artist or documented by art history or documented by the market. When I say good, I mean we all are seeking something, and at the end of the day, we're seeking what we like, we're seeking what we think is beautiful, we're seeking what we think that the public audience we share with need to see, need to have represented, and want to have, we collect what we call art from the present for the future. And that is really what we do.
Let's end there. I want to thank.
One quick
Ryan, please.
tip as you're either if you're a collector looking at an artist or an artwork that proposes to be using AI, or whether you're an artist who's thinking about incorporating AI tools into your practice. If you're going to build up from first principles with a model, you should know either as a collector that artist has sufficient data to build a model and really supply that model. I have found myself, when I dive in under the hood with a number of artists who are proposing to use AI in their work, that I come out the other side and I have to tell them that you are proposing to make a surfable wave and you have a bathtub of water. Make sure the data is there and that AI isn't used as just like a conceptual kind of brush
Shouldn't be
over
gimmicky.
something. Yes, and a gimmicky.
Shouldn't be gimmicky.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like the 4 of us need to pick up this conversation again. Want to thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Great job.